mother, stole my husband, the devastating truth. The elegant restaurant was illuminated by a soft glow, reflecting the refinement that surrounded every detail of that celebration. Grace, a 30-year-old woman, smiled radiantly as she raised her glass of sparkling wine to toast with Dominic, her beloved husband. He, a successful businessman, was dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated his imposing silhouette. The atmosphere was filled with love and renewed promises, but in a corner of the room, a figure watched with an enigmatic gaze. Olivia, Grace's mother. "Happy anniversary, my love," Grace exclaimed, her eyes shining with happiness. "Happy anniversary, Grace. You are the reason for my success and my happiness," Dominic replied, holding her hand, with a smile that seemed genuine. The couple exchanged knowing glances, losing themselves in a world that only they understood. However, Olivia's presence, with her introspective and distant look, did not go unnoticed. The woman in her 60s, with well-groomed gray hair and an elegant posture, seemed to absorb every moment of the celebration, but something in her expression revealed a mix of nostalgia and sadness. Grace didn't notice her mother, lost in the joy of the moment, but something in the atmosphere felt tense, as if the air was laden with unspoken secrets. As Grace and Dominic exchanged vows of eternal love, Olivia discreetly turned, observing the restaurant's activity. Her mind was far away, lost in memories she wished to forget, but that stubbornly resurfaced. The image of Dominic disturbed her, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she recalled the last time they were together. The memory made her feel guilty, but still, she forced herself to smile, trying to push away the troubling thoughts. The night continued with laughter and toasts, until, upon arriving home, Grace noticed something strange. Dominic's cell phone was on the table, with a notification flashing insistently. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. She approached and, without a second thought, picked up the device. A message from an unknown number awaited her. "I hope we can meet soon. I miss you." Grace's heart raced. "Dominic," she called, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Can I ask who this person is?" He entered the room and saw Grace holding his phone. The smile that had once illuminated his face vanished quickly. "What are you doing with my phone, Grace?" I found a message." Grace tried not to let her insecurity show in her voice. "Who is this woman?" Dominic frowned, trying to remain calm. "Let me see that. You can't jump to conclusions. It's just a work acquaintance." "A work acquaintance?" Grace repeated, her voice rising a pitch. "You know I'm not the jealous type, but this seems much more than just an acquaintance." He took a deep breath and ran his hand through his hair, visibly uncomfortable. "Look, I promise there's nothing wrong. You know the pressure at work has been intense, and maybe I let myself get carried away by conversations I shouldn't have." Doubt began to settle in Grace's heart, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. "Why didn't you tell me? What else are you hiding?" The atmosphere between them was heavy. Grace felt a mix of anger and confusion, while Dominic tried to evade the questions. It was as if an abyss opened between them, a space that was once filled with love and trust, now rife with uncertainties. That night, as the echoes of laughter and toasts still resonated in her mind, Grace decided she needed answers. The trust she once had in Dominic began to crumble, and the only thing she knew was that she could not ignore the signs before her. She felt that somewhere, The truth was about to be revealed, and that discovery could change everything. "I'm going to my mother's house. I need to talk to her," Grace declared, determined, as she walked away. Dominic watched her leave, concern etched on his face, unaware that this would be the first of many conversations that would uncover dark secrets and devastating betrayals. Grace confided in Olivia about her suspicions regarding Dominic and how her trust in him was shaken. She shared how she felt, the pain of the possibility of being betrayed. Olivia listened attentively to Grace's outpouring and tried to calm her. "Sweetheart, get those doubts out of your mind. Dominic loves you. Don't let this shake your marriage," Olivia said, though lacking confidence in her voice. Grace was not convinced by Olivia's words and decided she could no longer live in uncertainty. The enigmatic message on Dominic's phone haunted her, but what troubled her even more was the possibility that he was meeting another woman. Grace's mind was swirling with questions. Who was this woman? What did she have that Grace did not? In search of answers, she began to investigate her husband's life. One afternoon, Grace sat in Dominic's office, a modern and sophisticated space adorned with abstract paintings and designer furniture. She decided to rummage through his things, feeling guilty for invading his privacy. But the need to uncover the truth outweighed any remorse. She flipped through documents, glanced at the photos on the desk, but nothing seemed out of place. Until, when opening a drawer, she found a business card for a fancy restaurant she did not recognize. On the back there was a note: "We'll meet at 8 p.m. Don't forget what we talked about." Grace's heart raced. She knew that time didn't coincide with any of Dominic's work meetings. What she had found could be evidence that he was hiding something. Her mind began to conjure horrible scenarios. What if it's true? What if he's cheating on me, she thought, as despair consumed her. The next day, during a family lunch, Grace observed every move her mother, Olivia, and Dominic made. The atmosphere was charged, and Grace felt her mother knew something, but lacked the courage to reveal it. As the food was served, she decided to provoke a casual conversation. "So, Mom, you two have been attending a lot of meetings together lately, haven't you?" Grace said, trying to sound nonchalant. Olivia, who was cutting a piece of meat, froze for a second, but quickly forced a smile. "Oh, of course. Dominic is an excellent businessman, and we always meet at business events." Dominic, who was seated across from her, looked at Grace with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, there's always something happening in the business world, but it's nice to have some time to get together, isn't it?" he said, trying to change the subject. Grace noticed the way Olivia looked at Dominic, a gaze that hinted at some hidden secret, and Grace was certain that Olivia knew something. The tension escalated, and Grace felt she needed to confront the situation once and for all. "Mom, do you know something about Dominic that you should tell me?" Grace asked, her voice firmer than she felt inside. Olivia looked away, swallowing hard. "Grace, you're being exaggerated. What would I know about Dominic that you don't?" she replied, trying to maintain her composure. The conversation grew tense, and Dominic, sensing the gravity of the situation, intervened. "Grace, you're creating situations that don't exist. Your mother and I just share professional interests, and I have nothing to hide. There's nothing to worry about." Grace felt a lump in her throat. His denial seemed like a desperate attempt to cover the truth, but at the same time, the seed of doubt planted in her mind began to sprout, and the idea that Olivia knew something made her uneasy. Later on her way home, Grace couldn't stop thinking about everything they had discussed. The connection between her mother and Dominic was undeniable, and the distrust was transforming into a need for concrete proof. When she arrived home, she decided she needed more than just assumptions. As she walked to Dominic's car to retrieve the glasses she had forgotten, her attention was drawn to a small piece of paper that was conspicuously lying on the driver's floor. As she bent down to pick it up, her heart stopped for a moment. It was a note, and when she opened it, she found words that made her feel as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. "My love, I can't stop thinking about you. Counting the days until our next night together." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. What more did she need to be sure of the betrayal? With tears in her eyes and a knot of rage and pain in her chest, she prepared to confront Dominic. He would have to answer, and she was determined not to be the naive woman who believed in promises of eternal love anymore. "Dominic!" she shouted as she entered the house, her voice trembling with anger. Dominic walked into the room holding a cup of cappuccino and a box of chocolates with the smile she loved so much, and Grace's heart calmed for a moment. She didn't have the courage to confront Dominic at that moment, and despite the whirlwind of emotions and confusion in her head, she ended up giving in, and they made love like they hadn't in a long time. The next morning, while Dominic was taking a shower, his phone buzzed, and Grace immediately grabbed the phone to look. The message read, "I'll meet you at 8 at the Vendo Estrellas Motel. It's on Quincas Valadares Street, 1070. I prepared something delicious for us." Grace felt like flying at Dominic in that instant, but she needed to be cold to find out exactly what Dominic was doing and who that woman was he was meeting. Grace's day was almost unbearable. The 7 hours until the meeting felt like 24, her mind spinning with a whirlwind of emotions, the pain in her chest as she was about to confirm her suspicions, and rehearsing how she would behave when she caught Dominic with the woman. Grace felt her heart pounding in her chest like a deafening drum as she hid behind a parked car in front of the motel. The sky was beginning to darken, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. But none of that mattered at that moment. Her eyes were fixed on the entrance to the motel. Just before 8, she saw Dominic park the car and get out with that smile she knew well, but it now seemed to carry an unbearable weight. The other door opened, and Dominic walked around to the passenger side, and at that moment, Grace felt like she was going to have a heart attack. She didn't know if she could bear it. That was when Grace saw the woman, Olivia, her mother, appeared, and they entered the motel hand in hand. "It can't be," she whispered to herself, almost breathless. The world around her seemed to spin, and the blurry vision of her mother next to her husband made her lose her footing. Grace didn't know what to do. She remembered all the good moments she had with Dominic, the love she felt for him, and the trust she had placed in her mother. Now, everything seemed like a big lie. The pain in her chest was unbearable, and for a moment, she wished she weren't alive to witness that abomination. With the determination she had left, Grace decided to remain quiet. All her rehearsals on what to do stopped there, and in a state of shock, she simply followed them with her eyes, even though the night's cold wrapped around her like a heavy blanket of despair. She just watched as Dominic and Olivia entered the motel, and the door closed behind them with a click that echoed in her heart. My God, what was happening? Grace wondered, unwilling to believe what she had just seen. That was thousands of times worse than any suspicion she might have had about Dominic. And now she felt even more naive, like she had been blind right under her nose. Of course, Olivia knew Dominic's secret, and it was obvious she wouldn't tell Grace. Minutes passed, but Grace felt as if hours had dragged on. Finally, she decided she couldn't stay there any longer, inert, waiting for something worse to happen. With a shattered heart, she headed to the apartment she shared with Dominic, where she knew the confrontation would be inevitable. When she arrived home, Grace was in a whirlwind of emotions. She leaned against the kitchen table, trying to control her breathing and emotions before facing Dominic. When he finally arrived, he seemed carefree, as if nothing was happening. "Hi, love. How was your day?" he asked, with a smile that made her feel nauseous. "Sorry, but what were you doing at the motel with my mother?" The question came out like a scream, and Dominic stopped abruptly, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "Grace, what are you talking about?" He tried to deflect, but the anger grew in her like an out-of-control fire. "I saw you two. There's no point in denying it. Since when has this been happening between you?" Grace demanded, her voice trembling between indignation and despair. "This isn't what it looks like," Dominic said, but the nervous look in his eyes made her realize he had a lot to hide. "So explain it to me, Dominic. How can you? How can you do this to me?" "To my mother, Dominic?" Grace shouted, feeling hot tears streaming down her face. Dominic hesitated, Grace pressing him. "Grace, I don't know how this happened, but I love you." "Olivia doesn't mean anything," Dominic argued, his voice now calmer, but Grace didn't want to hear anything more. She decided she couldn't let this pass. Looking into his eyes, Grace felt the flame of revenge ignite within her. "Do you think I'm going to let this slide? I can't believe you betrayed me, and with my own mother." Dominic's expression turned to despair, but Grace no longer cared. She turned her back, her heart shattering, but at the same time, a growing determination began to take hold of her. The pain of betrayal would be the foundation of her revenge. She needed a plan, something that would make Dominic and Olivia feel the pain she felt. Grace took a deep breath, already beginning to architect her response, determined not to be the victim in this story. Grace watched the imposing building where Dominic worked, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. After discovering her mother Olivia's devastating betrayal with her husband, she decided that she could no longer be a passive spectator in the story unfolding before her. "If he thinks he can fool me like this, he is very mistaken," she thought, as she headed to the cafe next to his company. With a rehearsed smile, Grace greeted Matteo, one of Dominic's partners, with whom she maintained a closer friendship. She knew that to infiltrate his life and discover his weaknesses, she needed to earn the trust of those who surrounded Dominic's business. Over the following weeks, she began to get closer to him, sharing laughter and lighthearted moments. During one of those casual meetings, Matteo commented on a project Dominic was working on. "This project could change everything for the company, Grace," Matteo said, his eyes sparkling. "If it goes well, Dominic will become a big name in the market. But if it fails..." The sentence hung in the air, full of possibilities. Grace felt a wave of adrenaline course through her body. That was the information she needed. "And what could go wrong?" Grace asked, trying to sound disinterested, but her mind was racing. Matteo hesitated before answering, but soon began to talk about the risks involved, mentioning a high investment the company had made. "If we can't attract the right investors, it could be ruinous for all of us," he confessed, looking around as if he had revealed a secret. Grace smiled, a plan starting to form in her mind. "That's concerning," she said, her voice mixing worry and interest. "Have you thought about how you could minimize those risks?" The conversation flowed, and Grace felt increasingly in control. That night, as Grace reflected on everything she had learned, the anger and pain she felt toward Olivia and Dominic transformed into a cold determination. If they think they can play with my feelings, they are going to learn a lesson, she murmured to herself. She began to outline a plan that mixed revenge with strategy, and the idea of ruining Dominic's project seemed more and more appealing. The next day, Grace decided it was time to gather more information. She hired a woman to pose as a business consultant. She scheduled a meeting with Dominic to discuss boosting his project. With a charming smile, she introduced herself at Dominic's office. "Hi, I'm Estella, and I'm here to help with the project you're developing. I've heard great things about you," she said, extending her hand to shake his. Dominic, surprised, smiled back. "Oh, of course. It's good to meet you. I'm really working hard on this project. As you can see, it's a challenge, but I'm confident." As they talked, Estella observed him closely. He seemed nervous, as if he felt the pressure of what was to come. "Tell me more about the challenges you're facing. Maybe I can help in some way," she insisted, trying to appear genuine. "Well, we have a tight deadline, and honestly, the team isn't as united as I would like," Dominic admitted, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Estella could see his vulnerability and saw an opportunity. That same week, armed with all the information Estella had provided, Grace had a more direct conversation with Matteo. What if, by chance, the project was at risk? "How do you think Dominic would react?" she asked, feigning curiosity. Matteo, unaware of Grace's intentions, replied, "He would be devastated. After all, his reputation is at stake." With that information in mind, Grace decided to take action. During a partners' meeting, Estella strategically positioned herself to cast the bait. "What if instead of moving forward with this investment, we considered other options? We need to be cautious," she suggested, observing the reactions of the partners. Dominic glared at her, his eyes narrowing. "Estella, this is not the time for hesitation. We need confidence now more than ever," he exclaimed, the tension palpable in the room. Estella smiled internally, knowing she was managing to destabilize him. Grace felt she was reaching her goal, but deep down, she faced a dilemma. She wondered how far she was willing to go for revenge. The desire for justice mingled with guilt that began to consume her heart. "After all, I also loved this man," she thought, but quickly reminded herself of the betrayal and the pain she felt upon discovering the truth. With a plan in mind and determination firm, Grace prepared for what was to come next. She knew she was approaching a decisive moment where truth and revenge could collide in a devastating way. "Dominic, you don't know what's about to happen," she murmured to herself as she prepared for the next step of her strategy. Grace sat at her desk, surrounded by papers and documents that once represented the security of her life, but now were just a tangle of memories of happiness that seemed distant. The deal she had made with Dominic left her in a state of ambivalence. On one hand, she felt she finally had control of the situation. On the other, a shadow of guilt consumed her. She couldn't stop thinking about how her choice affected not just Dominic's career, but also Olivia's future and the relationship they had built over the years. Grace began to plan her infiltration at the next event of his company. It was a launch cocktail for the much-anticipated project that promised to be grand. "If I can get a recording, I'll have everything I need to expose them," she thought, adrenaline coursing through her veins. On the night of the event, Grace dressed in an elegant black dress that not only made her look stunning, but also helped her blend in with the guests. Arriving at the venue, she felt her nerves rise. Soft music filled the air as guests laughed and toasted Dominic's success. Grace took a deep breath, disguising her anxiety, and began to circulate among the groups. She kept her eyes wide open, attentive to every movement. When she finally spotted Dominic talking to Olivia in a more isolated corner, her heart raced. With a determined look, Grace approached discreetly, positioning herself behind a group of people. The conversation between them flowed, and Grace, hiding her phone, activated the recording. "You need to be patient, Olivia. We have to be careful," Dominic said, his voice low, but loud enough for Grace to hear every word. The betrayal was there, exposed in his words, like a sharp blade cutting through her hopes. And even better, proof that Dominic and Olivia were deceiving everyone at the company. Grace felt her stomach churn. The confirmation she had been seeking was finally in her hands. With the recording, she felt stronger, more determined. It was time to put an end to the cycle of betrayals and lies, and the truth needed to come to light. The cocktail party was a success, and Grace got what she wanted, the proof of the betrayals, having now discovered another one. The following week would be the first meeting with the partners and investors, with Olivia being one of the largest shareholders in Dominic's company. In the elegant conference room of Dominic's company, many important investors were seated, and it was a crucial moment for Dominic, who had created an excellent presentation to impress them. Olivia, sitting next to Dominic, wore a wide and confident smile, truly unconcerned about her daughter's absence. When Dominic finally stood up to begin his presentation, Grace entered the room, took a deep breath, and looked around. Dominic's partners, respected businessmen, watched her with curiosity and concern. She smiled, but it wasn't a genuine smile. It was a smile that hid desperation. The atmosphere, normally filled with laughter and productive discussions, was heavy with the tension Grace's presence had created. "It's great to see all of you here," Grace began, her voice firm but trembling. "I brought something you all need to hear." She pulled her smartphone from her pocket and with a slightly trembling hand pressed the play button. The room filled with the voices of Dominic and Olivia, laughing, exchanging promises and words of love, and discussing their miraculous plan to steal everyone's money and disappear. The silence was broken by murmurs of disbelief from the partners. Grace felt the adrenaline pulsing through her veins, a mix of anger and satisfaction. "This is unacceptable," said one of the partners, Jorge, while the others exchanged shocked glances. "Dominic, are you going to tell us this isn't true?" Dominic, who was standing, ran his hand through his hair, pale and dazed. "Grace, you can't do this. This doesn't just involve me, it involves the entire company. It's a betrayal to our business, which benefits you too." His voice trembled as he tried to regain control of the situation, but Grace was not willing to give him that chance. "Betrayal is what you did to me, Dominic," she shouted, her eyes burning. "You betrayed me, you betrayed our family, and now you're trying to save your own skin while destroying everything we've built together." The indignation reverberated in her voice, and she couldn't contain herself any longer. The weight of emotions finally found an outlet. Olivia, sitting next to Dominic, tried to maintain her composure, but the panic in her eyes was undeniable. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." She stood up, trying to intervene, but the partners were not willing to listen to her justifications. "You don't understand the situation." Chaos took over the room. The partners began murmuring among themselves, gesturing and shaking their heads in disapproval. "Dominic, we can't continue in the company like this," said one of the partners, Andre, with a look of disappointment. "This is unacceptable. We can't trust you." Dominic's expression shifted from anger to despair. "Please don't abandon me. I can explain. This recording was manipulated." But his words fell on deaf ears. Grace watched as the partners and investors began to walk away, one by one, as he desperately tried to hold them back. The feeling of freedom and relief washed over Grace. She had exposed the truth, and now everything that had held her back was unraveling. She turned to Olivia, who was in tears, regret etched across her face. "You can't blame me, Grace. I never imagined it would come to this. I loved him." "Loved? You don't love someone when you destroy their life." Grace had no more tears to cry. What remained was just a deep void, but she was no longer willing to let it consume her. Sometime later, Grace decided it was time to move on. With the truth revealed, the pain began to dissipate, making way for new possibilities. She enrolled in a photography course, something she had always dreamed of doing, and met Ricardo, a young artist who made her laugh and encouraged her to rediscover herself. Sometimes she looked back and felt a pang of sadness. But life was more than the betrayal of her mother and Dominic. Meanwhile, Olivia was left alone, sitting at home, surrounded by photos of the past that now seemed distant and unreal. Regret consumed her, and the echo of betrayal resonated in her heart, especially since she had to look for a job and now worked as a clerk in a bookstore. Grace had taken control of her life, while her mother found herself lost, a shadow of who she once was. Grace no longer wanted to look back. She was ready to live the life she deserved, filled with love and self-discovery. Life was renewing itself, and finally, she could breathe again.